The rain-slicked streets of Eldridge Hollow gleamed under the sodium glow of streetlights, turning the night into a blurred watercolor of shadows and regret. At 2:17 a.m., in the dim emergency room of Mercy General Hospital, a lone figure slumped against the nurse's station, her scrubs stained with the day's relentless battles. Emily Harlan, 32, with calloused hands and eyes shadowed by too many sleepless shifts, wiped her brow and glanced at the clock. Another night in the trenches, where the line between savior and survivor blurred like the downpour outside. But tonight, fate had other plans. A call that would shatter her fragile world and ignite a fire she never knew she carried. It started with a crash that echoed through the corridors like thunder, tires screeching on wet asphalt, metal twisting in protest, and then silence, broken only by the frantic beeps of incoming sirens. Emily's heart lurched as paramedics burst through the double doors, wheeling in a man whose leather vest was torn and bloodied, his face pale against the roar of his fallen kingdom. Jacob Iron Maddox, president of the Iron Promise Motorcycle Club, lay there, chest heaving, a knife wound hidden beneath the chaos of a barroom brawl gone wrong. Whispers among the staff painted him as trouble, a relic of the old guard, leading a brotherhood of outcasts who rode the edges of the law. But to Emily, he was just another soul teetering on the brink. The ER erupted into controlled pandemonium. Doctors barked orders, monitors wailed, and Emily moved like a ghost in the storm, her instincts honed from years of stitching up the broken. Jacob's vitals plummeted as complications arose. A hidden bleed from the blade that had caught him during the skirmish at the Rusty Anchor. The on-call surgeon was delayed, traffic a nightmare in the deluge, and the attending physician, Dr. Harlan's no-nonsense superior, hesitated. "We can't risk it," he muttered, eyeing the monitors. "He's a liability. Stabilize and transfer." But Emily saw the flicker in Jacob's eyes, the unspoken plea of a man who'd stared down death on open roads and lived to tell the tales. In that suspended moment, with rain lashing the windows like accusatory fingers, Emily made her choice. She wasn't a doctor, just a nurse with a past riddled by loss. Her brother's overdose 5 years back. A promise to him whispered over his hospital bed. "I'll save who I can, for both of us." Ignoring protocol, she stepped forward, gloved hands steady as she assessed the wound. "I can do this," she said, voice cutting through the tension like a revving engine. The team froze, but Jacob's gaze locked on hers, a nod of raw trust passing between them. With precise incisions and a makeshift clamp born of battlefield ingenuity from her volunteer days in crisis zones, she stemmed the flow, buying precious minutes until help arrived. His color returned, breath steadying, as the surgeon finally burst in, taking over with grudging approval. By dawn, Jacob was stable in recovery, the club emblem on his vest, catching the first light like a badge of survival. Emily lingered at his bedside, exhaustion etching lines on her face, but a quiet satisfaction warming her core. He'd murmured thanks, his gravelly voice promising, "You got my word, darling. Iron promise, don't forget." She smiled faintly, dismissing it as delirium, and clocked out into the grey morning, the scent of antiseptic clinging to her skin like a second shadow. 2 shifts later, the hammer fell. Dr. Ellis summoned her to his office, the door clicking shut with finality. "You overstepped, Harlan," he said, his tone clipped, eyes avoiding hers. "That stunt with Maddox, it could have cost us everything. Lawsuits, scrutiny from the board. You're off the schedule, effective immediately." Emily stood there, the words landing like punches to the gut. Fired for saving a life. The hospital's zero-tolerance policy on unapproved interventions, they called it, but she knew the truth. Jacob's club ties painted him as a pariah, and she was collateral. Her hands trembled as she handed over her badge, the weight of betrayal settling in her chest. No severance, no references, just a cardboard box of her locker contents and a walk to the parking lot under a sky that threatened more rain. She drove home through the winding back roads, the wipers slapping rhythmically, her mind replaying the night's chaos. Eldridge Hollow was a town of forgotten promises where factories rusted and dreams died young. Emily's apartment was a modest refuge above a mechanic's shop, filled with faded photos of her brother and relics from road trips they'd never taken. She collapsed onto the couch, the sting of injustice burning hotter than the wound she'd mended. Why fight for honor in a world that rewarded silence? But deep down, a spark flickered, Jacob's words echoing, a thread of loyalty pulling at the edges of her resolve. Unbeknownst to her, across town in the Iron Promise clubhouse, word spread like wildfire through the ranks. Jacob, propped up in his hospital bed, gripped the phone with bandaged hands. "She saved me, brothers, risked it all." The line went quiet, then erupted in affirmations, engines revving in the background, the brotherhood stirring. Riders from distant chapters got the call. A nurse, one of their own in spirit, cast out for standing tall. By midday, plans coalesced, a silent vow forming in the smoke-filled air. Emily didn't hear the rumble at first. It started as a distant hum, vibrating through the floorboards of her apartment. She rose, peering out the window, and froze. The street below transformed into a sea of chrome and leather. Motorcycles lined up for blocks, engines idling with a low, thunderous growl that shook the very foundations. 50, then 100, bikers from Iron Promise and allied crews, their vests gleaming under the emerging sun. At the front, Jacob rode shotgun in a club's transport van, flanked by his lieutenants. They weren't here for vengeance. This was restitution, a promise fulfilled. As the convoy stretched into the horizon, Emily stepped outside, the air thick with the scent of exhaust and resolve. Jacob's eyes met hers through the window, a nod sealing the pact. In that moment, she wasn't just a fired nurse. She was family, chosen by the road. The bikes roared to life, a symphony of loyalty that drowned out the town's cynicism, carrying her into a redemption she never sought but desperately needed. The rain had stopped, and for the first time in years, the dawn felt like hope. The sun crested the hills like a hesitant witness, casting long shadows over the assembled ranks of chrome beasts and weathered souls. Emily Harlan stood on the cracked stoop of her apartment building, the morning air crisp with the tang of dew-kissed asphalt and the faint, acrid bite of engine oil. Her heart pounded in rhythm with the idling motors, a low symphony that vibrated through her bones, pulling her from the numbness of betrayal into something raw and alive. The convoy stretched like a steel river, from the mechanic's shop at her feet to the bend where Elm Street faded into the mist-shrouded outskirts of Eldridge Hollow. Over 100 riders, their faces etched with the miles of hard roads and harder choices, turned as one to acknowledge her presence. Jacob Maddox leaned out from the passenger side of the lead van, his frame still bandaged but unbowed, the Iron Promise patch on his vest catching the light like a talisman. "Emily," he called, his voice gravel over thunder, carrying clear despite the rumble. "You stood for me when the white coats wouldn't. Now we stand for you." The words hung in the air, simple yet weighted with the gravity of oaths sworn in smoke-filled garages and rain-lashed highways. She blinked back the sting in her eyes, the box of her belongings forgotten at her feet. These weren't strangers, they were echoes of the loyalty she'd lost when her brother slipped away, a brotherhood forged not by blood, but by the fire of shared scars. A lieutenant named Tyler, broad-shouldered with a beard streaked in silver, dismounted first, his boots thudding softly on the pavement. He extended a hand, calloused and steady. "Name's Tyler, VP of the club. Iron here's got a way of collecting debts and yours just got paid in full. Emily hesitated, her nurse's instincts screaming caution, protocol, liability, the invisible lines that had cost her everything. But the sea of vests, emblazoned with skulls and promises, parted slightly, revealing women among the ranks. A mechanic with grease under her nails. A rider with a healer's gaze, all nodding in quiet solidarity. This wasn't chaos, it was conviction. A family chosen in the shadow of forgotten towns. As she climbed into the van beside Jacob, the door sealing with a soft click, the engines ignited in unison. A roar split the dawn, deep and resonant, shaking windows in the sleepy neighborhood. Emily gripped the armrest, the vibration traveling up her spine like a pulse of reclaimed strength. They rolled out slowly at first, the convoy a moving fortress, headlights piercing the lingering fog. Jacob glanced her way, his eyes, storm-grey and knowing, holding stories of battles won on backroads and betrayals in boardrooms. The hospital, they think they're untouchable, Harlan. But we've seen their kind before, suits hiding behind rules while good folks bleed out. He paused, the van's interior smelling of leather and faint antiseptic, a bridge between her world and his. You saved my life, risked yours for it. Iron promise, don't let that slide. The ride wound through Eldridge Hollow's veins, past the rusted silos of abandoned mills and the neon flickers of diners just stirring to life. Emily watched the town unfold. A place she'd poured her days into healing, now revealing its underbelly of quiet corruption. Whispers from the club painted the picture. Dr. Ellis, the attending who'd pulled strings to bury the incident, had ties to local developers eyeing the hospital land for profit. Jacob's brawl at the Rusty Anchor, not random. A setup by rivals sniffing around the club's territory, but the real wound was institutional indifference. They fired you to cover their tracks, Jacob said, his voice low as the van crested a hill. But we're gonna shine a light on it. Your way if you want. No guns, no fists, just truth. Doubt flickered in Emily's chest, a cold draft against the warmth of the Brotherhood's resolve. She'd always fought alone, stitching wounds in sterile silence, honoring her brother's ghost with every shift. But here, flanked by riders who knew the cost of standing firm, she felt the pull of something deeper, a promise reborn. The convoy halted at the hospital's perimeter, a strategic pause on the access road, engines cutting to a murmur. Staff emerged from the building, faces paling at the sight, a wall of loyalty, unyielding and immense. Dr. Ellis appeared at the entrance, his white coat flapping like a flag of surrender, flanked by security guards who looked more uneasy than authoritative. Tyler stepped forward, megaphone in hand, his words amplified over the hush. We're here for Emily Harlan. She saved one of ours, Jacob Maddox, when you wouldn't. Fired her for it like honor's a crime. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of onlookers gathering at a safe distance, phones raised to capture the moment. Emily exited the van, her legs steady despite the tremor in her soul, and faced Ellis across the lot. The doctor's eyes darted, calculating, but she held her ground, the scent of exhaust mingling with the hospital's sterile bloom. I did my job, she said, voice clear, carrying the weight of unspoken accusations. You let politics decide who lives. The standoff stretched, tension coiling like a spring in the morning light. Jacob watched from the van, a faint smile cracking his stoic facade. This was her redemption, not conquest. Bystanders whispered of the nurse who'd bent rules for right, the club that rode for the overlooked. Ellis shifted, sweat beading despite the chill. This is private matter, he stammered, but the conviction faltered, cracks forming in the facade of authority. Emily's phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from an anonymous board member, hinting at an internal review sparked by the night's events. The convoy's presence alone was a catalyst, forcing the shadows into view. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the chrome in golden fire, the riders remained, a silent testament to loyalty's long reach. Emily felt the shift within her, the isolation of her losses giving way to connection. Her brother's promise echoed faintly, "Save who you can." Now, with iron promise at her back, she realized saving meant more than bandages. It was about mending the fractures in a world quick to discard the honorable. The hospital doors loomed, but for the first time, they didn't intimidate. This was just the beginning, a ride toward justice that would test bonds and unearth buried truths 1 mile at a time. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The morning sun burned away the last veils of fog, turning the hospital parking lot into a stage of stark contrasts, gleaming chrome against faded concrete, leather vests against starched white coats. Emily Harlan stood at the forefront of the Iron Promise convoy, her pulse sinking with the low hum of idling engines, a chorus of unwavering support that drowned out the knot of uncertainty in her gut. Dr. Ellis hovered at the entrance, his face a mask of forced composure. But the tremor in his hands betrayed him, as security personnel flanked him like hesitant shadows. The air carried the sharp tang of exhaust, mingled with the faint, clinical scent wafting from the building, a reminder of the world that had cast her out. Jacob Maddox watched from the van's open door, his bandaged shoulder a silent testament to the debt that bound them. He hadn't ridden in years without a purpose, but this felt like one forged in the fires of old oaths, promises made in the dim glow of taillights after too many brothers lost to indifferent systems. "Let her lead," he'd told Tyler earlier, his voice a rumble over the phone lines that had summoned riders from 3 counties away. Emily, sensing the weight of expectant eyes, took a step forward, the gravel crunching under her sneakers like brittle resolve giving way. "Dr. Ellis," she said, her tone steady despite the storm inside, "this isn't about revenge. It's about what happened in that ER. Jacob was dying, and you chose paperwork over a life." Ellis's eyes narrowed, scanning the sea of bikers who sat astride their machines like statues of quiet defiance. Over 100 strong now. Their numbers had swelled as word rippled through allied clubs. Veterans from dusty southern routes, mechanics from the industrial sprawl to the east, all converging on Eldridge Hollow like tributaries to a greater river. Whispers among the staff leaked out, nurses peeking from windows, orderlies murmuring about the night shift's hushed rebellion. One of them, a young aide named Sarah with wide eyes and a badge pinned crookedly, had slipped Emily a note earlier, details of falsified logs, the surgeon's delay not from traffic, but a golf game with bored influences. Corruption, not coincidence, had nearly claimed Jacob. The doctor's response came clipped, laced with the arrogance of untouchable authority. "You violated protocol, Harlan, endangering a patient for... what, glory? This circus only proves you're in over your head." But his words faltered as Tyler raised the megaphone again, his voice booming with the cadence of a man who'd stared down bar fights and badge-wielding cops alike. "Protocol? That's code for looking the other way while good people get buried. Emily Harlan saved our president when your rules would have let him bleed out. We're not leaving till the board hears it straight. No filters, no spin." The crowd of onlookers grew, locals drawn by the spectacle. A barista from the corner cafe, a retiree walking his dog, their phones capturing the standoff like fragments of a larger truth unfolding. Emily felt the pull of doubt, a cold whisper from her past, her brother's final days in a similar ward, dismissed as just another junkie by overworked staff chasing quotas. She'd promised him then, in the dim light of his room, to fight the indifference, but the system had ground her down to routine stitches and averted eyes. Now, with the iron promise at her back, that promise reignited, fierce and unyielding. She pulled the note from her pocket, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom of the open air. "This says you delayed help. For what? Land deals? The club's not the enemy here. The real threat's inside those walls, trading lives for profit." A murmur rippled through the bikers, engines revving in short bursts like affirmations. The sound vibrating through the lot and into the hospital's corridors. Jacob dismounted slowly, leaning on Tyler for support, his presence alone shifting the dynamic. He approached Ellis, close enough for the doctor to smell the road dust on his clothes, the faint metallic hint of his healing wound. "I know your type," Jacob said, his gravelly tone low but piercing. "Suits who forget the road started with saving each other. Emily's one of us now. You hurt her. You hurt the promise we all ride for." Ellis paled, glancing back at the building where shadows moved behind blinds. Board members, no doubt, scrambling to contain the narrative. The tension coiled tighter as a patrol car pulled up to the perimeter, lights flashing silently, an officer stepping out with notepad in hand. Whispers of arrests floated, but the bikers held formation, a wall of leather and loyalty that spoke louder than any siren. Emily's mind raced. This could end in cuffs, headlines twisting heroes into villains, but backing down meant surrendering the moral high ground she'd clawed for. Sarah emerged then, the aide, her scrubs rumpled, clutching a folder. "It's true," she said, voice trembling but clear, stepping to Emily's side. "I saw the logs. They buried it to protect the expansion project, turning the East Wing into condos while cutting staff." The revelation hung like smoke after a backfire, forcing Ellis to retreat a step. The officer, a grizzled local named Ryan with a veteran's patch on his uniform, another thread in the web of chosen family, listened intently, his radio crackling with dispatch queries. "This sounds like a matter for internal review," he said finally, eyeing the convoy with something akin to respect. "But if there's tampering, that's on the state boys." No arrests, just a nod to stand down peacefully, the law bending slightly under the weight of collective truth, as the sun arched toward noon, casting harsh shadows that accentuated the lines of determination on weathered faces. The convoy began to disperse in controlled waves, riders peeling off toward the clubhouse for debriefs, others lingering as sentinels. Emily watched Ellis disappear inside, the doors swinging shut like a defeated sigh. Jacob clapped a hand on her shoulder, light but firm. "You did good, Harlan. This ain't over. Truth's a long ride, but we go the distance." She nodded, the exhaustion of the morning mingling with a budding fire, the scent of oil and resolve clinging to her like armor. In the quiet that followed, Emily realized the depth of it, not just justice for one act, but a reckoning for the overlooked scars of Eldridge Hollow. Her brother's ghost felt closer, his promise evolving through the Brotherhood's unyielding code. The hospital loomed, but now it was a challenge, not a cage. With Iron Promise's engines fading into the horizon, she turned toward the van, ready for whatever miles lay ahead. Redemption not as a solitary path, but a convoy's shared journey. The air hummed with possibility, the first cracks in corruption widening under the relentless light of loyalty. The midday sun hung heavy over Eldridge Hollow, baking the asphalt into a shimmering haze that distorted the edges of the world like a fever dream. Emily Harlan slid into the passenger seat of the club's transport van, the leather creaking under her as Jacob Maddox settled beside her, his presence a solid anchor amid the dispersing roar of engines. The convoy fractured into smaller packs, riders peeling off toward the horizon with nods of solidarity, their taillights winking like distant stars against the blue expanse. The hospital receded in the rear-view mirror, a monolithic shadow now pierced by the light of exposed truths. But Emily's mind churned with the aftershocks. Sarah's folder clutched in her lap, its pages heavy with the weight of hidden ledgers and signed-off delays. Jacob shifted, wincing slightly as the van hit a pothole, the faint scent of his pain meds mingling with the ever-present aroma of road-worn leather. "That note from Sarah," "It's the key," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the hum of tires on pavement. "Board's been cooking the books for months, skimming funds for those condo deals while the ER runs on fumes. You lit the fuse, Emily. Now we fan the flames." She traced the edges of the folder, her fingers still carrying the ghost of surgical gloves, the sterile tang of the hospital clinging to her skin like an unwelcome memory. Doubt gnawed at her. This wasn't her fight, not really. She'd saved one life, honored a promise to her brother, but unraveling a web of corruption? That was territory for lawyers and whistleblowers, not a nurse with a cardboard box of regrets. The van wound toward the Iron Promise clubhouse on the town's frayed outskirts, a weathered warehouse flanked by chain link and wild tangles of overgrown weeds, its walls scarred by years of storms and stories. As they pulled up, the remaining riders formed a loose perimeter, engines cutting to silence that amplified the crunch of gravel under boots. Tyler dismounted first, his silver-streaked beard catching the light as he waved over a cluster of club members, veterans with faded tattoos, mapping old wounds, a few women mechanics wiping grease from their hands, all bound by the unspoken code of chosen kin. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of fresh coffee and engine degreaser, fluorescent bulbs buzzing overhead like hesitant fireflies. Emily followed Jacob into the main hall, where a scarred oak table served as command center, maps and printouts scattered like battlefield relics. Ryan, the officer from the standoff, arrived shortly after, his uniform traded for a plain jacket, a nod to the blurred lines between badge and brotherhood. "State's sniffing around now," he said, sliding into a chair with a creak, his eyes sharp under a furrowed brow. "Ellis lawyered up quick, but Sarah's testimony, that's gold. She's holed up at her sister's, scared, but solid." Emily sat across from him, the folder open before her, revealing timestamps that didn't align. The surgeon's delay coinciding with a private meeting at the country club, funds diverted from patient care to shadowy accounts tied to the development firm. As the group pored over the documents, voices overlapping in a tapestry of strategy, Jacob's gravelly directives, Tyler's pragmatic cuts, Ryan's insider cautions, a new figure emerged from the shadows. Grace, a sharp-eyed paralegal who'd ridden with the club since her own days of loss, a husband claimed by a factory collapse ignored by insurers. She leaned over the table, her ponytail swinging like a pendulum. "This ties back to the land grab," she said, tapping a highlighted entry. "Hospital boards in bed with Vanguard Properties, pushing out the poor for luxury builds. Jacob's brawl, rivals tip them off to stir trouble, make the club look like the bad guys blocking expansion." Emily's stomach twisted, the pieces fit too neatly, a machine of greed grinding down the vulnerable, much like the indifference that had stolen her brother. The discussion stretched into the afternoon, sunlight slanting through grimy windows to paint golden bars across the floor, illuminating faces etched with resolve. Emily contributed haltingly at first, her nurse's precision dissecting the medical logs, but soon her voice gained strength, fueled by the circle's unyielding faith. "They didn't just fire me," she realized aloud, the words tasting like bitter revelation. "They silenced anyone who saw the cracks. My brother's case, similar cover-up chalked off as unavoidable. I promised him I'd fight it. But alone, I was just noise." Jacob met her gaze, his storm-grey eyes holding the depth of roads travelled in silence. "Not alone anymore, Harlan. Iron Promise rides for the silenced. This promise, it's ours now." Tension simmered as dusk crept in, the clubhouse filling with the low murmur of incoming calls, tips from hospital insiders. A board member's nervous voicemail leaked through anonymous channels. Ryan's radio crackled intermittently, updates from state investigators circling the periphery, but the real storm brewed internally. Whispers of retaliation, Ellis's allies pressuring Sarah to recant. Emily stepped outside for air, the cooling evening carrying the distant whine of a lone motorcycle scouting the perimeter. The sky bruised purple, stars pricking through like hesitant allies, and she felt the pull of the horizon, the road's endless call to keep moving, to honor what mattered. Back inside, the plan solidified. Grace would file the formal complaint at dawn, backed by affidavits from the club and Sarah's evidence. No raids, no confrontations, just the steady pressure of truth eroding lies. Mile by moral mile, Jacob raised a mug of black coffee and toast, the steam curling like unspoken vows. "Two promises kept," he said, and the room echoed it, a chorus of gravel and grace. Emily clinked her glass, the liquid warm against her palm, a spark igniting in her chest. This wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation, a family's quiet stand against the tide of corruption. As night deepened, the clubhouse hummed with purpose, sentries posted under the moon's pale watch. Emily lingered by a window, watching taillights fade into the dark, the scent of night-blooming jasmine mingling with exhaust. Her brother's photo, tucked in her pocket now, felt lighter, a legacy evolving through bonds forged in chrome and courage. The fight ahead loomed, riddled with shadows and setbacks. But for the first time, she rode with a convoy at her back, loyalty's engine revving toward justice's distant dawn. If this tale of unbreakable bonds is stirring something in you, smash that like button. It helps spread these stories of honor and heart to those who need them most. The first light of dawn crept over Eldridge Hollow like a cautious scout, painting the clubhouse windows in hues of rose and steel grey, the air thick with the chill of impending revelation. Emily Harlan stood at the scarred oak table, her fingers tracing the edges of the affidavit Grace had prepared overnight, the paper crisp under her touch, carrying the faint ink scent of battles waged in quiet offices rather than roaring highways. The room hummed with subdued energy, mugs of cooling coffee scattered like spent shells, the low murmur of voices weaving plans into unbreakable threads. Jacob Maddox leaned against a beam, his bandaged frame casting a long shadow, eyes watchful as riders filtered in from night watches, their boots leaving faint mud tracks on the concrete floor. Grace adjusted her glasses, her sharp gaze cutting through the haze of cigarette smoke that lingered from the late hours. "It's airtight," she said, sliding copies across the table to Tyler and Ryan, who nodded in unison. The weight of their shared history evident in the subtle clasp of hands, a veteran's grip forged in losses that no ledger could quantify. Sarah's sworn statement, the tampered logs, even audio from that leaked voicemail. "We file at the county clerk's by 9, then straight to the state ethics board. No room for spin." Emily absorbed the words, her heart a steady drumbeat against the storm of what-ifs swirling in her mind. This was more than paperwork. It was a gauntlet thrown at the feet of men who'd built empires on buried truths, the kind that had claimed her brother years ago in a haze of overlooked signs and expedited dismissals. As the group mobilized, engines coughing to life outside like waking guardians, Emily slipped into the van with Jacob and Grace, the interior still holding the night's chill, leather seats cool against her back. Tyler led the ride on his battered Harley, the convoy a streamlined arrow now, 24 riders, precise and purposeful, weaving through the waking streets where shopkeepers paused mid-sweep to stare, the rumble vibrating through storefront windows like an unspoken warning. The scent of fresh-baked bread from a corner bakery mingled with exhaust, a fleeting reminder of normalcy in a town teetering on the edge of upheaval. Emily's thoughts drifted to her brother's photo in her pocket, its edges worn from countless touches, a talisman against the fear that this stand might shatter more than it mended. The county clerk's office loomed at the end of Main Street, a squat brick building with flags snapping in the breeze, indifferent to the chrome tide rolling in. They parked in formation, a respectful barrier that drew curious glances from early commuters, their briefcases clutched like shields. Inside, the air was stale, laced with the musty aroma of old files and fluorescent hum. The clerk, a wiry woman named Olivia, with a no-nonsense bun, blinking at the influx. Grace stepped forward, folder in hand, her voice steady as she laid out the complaint. Allegations of fraud, endangerment, the hospital board's collusion with Vanguard Properties to prioritize profit over patients. Emily watched from the sidelines, her nurse's badge long discarded, but its lessons etched deep, the pulse of urgency, the fragility of trust. Olivia stamped the documents with mechanical efficiency, her eyes flickering to the bikers outside, visible through the glass like sentinels. "This'll trigger an audit," she said, handing back receipts, her tone neutral but laced with a hint of intrigue. "State moves slow, but once it bites, it don't let go." As they emerged, the sun fully risen now, gilding the chrome in fiery accents, a black SUV pulled up abruptly at the curb, sleek, out of place amid the grit. Dr. Ellis emerged, flanked by two suited men whose polished shoes clicked like accusations, their faces masks of calculated calm. The air thickened, the convoy's engines idling low, a subtle growl underscoring the tension. "Harlan," Ellis called, his voice slicing through the morning quiet, eyes darting to Jacob with thinly veiled disdain. "This stunt? It's harassment. The board's already consulting counsel. You're digging your own grave." One of the suits, a tall man with a briefcase chained to his wrist, stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne clashing with the road's honest musk. "Vanguard has interests here. Drop this, and perhaps we discuss reinstatement. Keep pushing, and it gets ugly. Witnesses recant, evidence vanishes." Emily felt the chill of threat coil in her gut, echoes of her brother's futile appeals, against a system that swallowed the small and spat out the broken. But Jacob's hand on her arm was steady, an anchor of iron resolve. Tyler dismounted, his broad frame blocking the path, voice even but edged like a well-honed blade. "Threats? That's your play? We've ridden through worse than boardroom bullies." Ryan, ever the bridge, interjected smoothly, flashing his off-duty credentials. "Everything's filed now, Doc. Tampering with process, that's a felony." The suits exchanged glances, the bluff cracking under the weight of collective eyes, riders watching without aggression, their presence a testament to loyalty's quiet power. Ellis's face flushed, the morning light harsh on his pallor, and he retreated to the SUV with a muttered curse, tires screeching as they peeled away. The victory was small, a foothold on a treacherous slope, but it ignited something in Emily, a fierce clarity, the promise to her brother evolving into a chorus of voices. Back at the clubhouse, the group reconvened, the air buzzing with updates, calls from journalists sniffing the story. A nurses' union rep reaching out to Sarah for support. Grace pored over responses, her laptop screen glowing like a beacon, while Jacob pulled Emily aside to the loading dock, the horizon stretching endless under a sky clearing to blue. "You feel it, don't you?" he said, lighting a cigarette, the flame flickering in the breeze. "That pull, like the road after a long rain, clear but full of turns." She nodded, the wind carrying the faint jasmine from the night before, mingling with the smoke. "I promised him I'd save who I could. Thought it was just in the ER. But this is saving the fight itself." Dusk fell as the real push began, anonymous tips flooding in, painting a broader canvas of neglect, delayed treatments for the uninsured, corners cut in the shadow of expansion plans. Emily contributed, her voice gaining ground in the circle, detailing patterns from her shifts that mirrored her brother's fate. Bonds deepened in the lamplight, stories shared over lukewarm takeout, Tyler's loss of a comrade to shoddy VA care, Grace's vigil for her husband amid corporate denials. Ryan coordinated with state contacts, his radio a lifeline to legitimacy. Yet shadows loomed. A harassing call to Sarah, whispers of bored retaliation. Emily lay awake that night in a spare bunk, the clubhouse's distant snores a lullaby of solidarity, her mind racing toward the horizon. By midnight, a breakthrough. The ethics board fast-tracked the audit, spurred by the convoy's visibility and mounting public murmurs. Jacob raised a toast in the dim hall, mugs clinking like spurs on a dusty trail. "One more mile," he said, his eyes meeting Emily's across the flames of a makeshift fire pit outside, where embers danced like unspoken vows. She felt the family's embrace, chosen and fierce, propelling her forward. The corruption's facade cracked further, but the final stand awaited, a test of honor under the relentless stars, where promises rode eternal. The stars wheeled overhead like silent witnesses, their cold fire mirroring the unyielding resolve that pulsed through the Iron Promise clubhouse as midnight bled into the wee hours. Emily Harlan paced the loading dock, the rough concrete biting through her sneakers, the night air laced with the sharp bite of cooling metal and distant rain-scented earth. Inside, the hall thrummed with low voices. Jacob Maddox conferring with Tyler over a flickering map of the town's underbelly. Grace tapping furiously at her laptop, her screen's glow casting ethereal shadows on the scarred walls. Ryan leaned against a workbench, radio in hand, relaying fragments from state lines. The audit was accelerating, investigators en route by first light, spurred by the cascade of tips that had flooded in like tributaries to a swelling river. Emily paused at the edge, gazing into the dark where the horizon swallowed the last embers of the fire pit. Her brother's photo weighed heavy in her pocket, a talisman now shared among the circle, passed hand to hand during stories of loss binding them tighter than any chain. She'd whispered her promise to him in sterile rooms, but here, under the vast sky, it expanded, not just saving lives, but salvaging the soul of a place like Eldridge Hollow, where factories crumbled and the overlooked faded into footnotes. A soft rumble pulled her back, Tyler's Harley idling as he approached, helmet tucked under his arm, silver in his beard glinting like frost. "Can't sleep?" he asked, voice gravel soft, the engine's warmth radiating against the chill. She shook her head, the wind tugging at her hair like insistent fingers. "Feels too big. What if the audit fizzles? Ellis and his suits, they bury things deeper than graves." Tyler nodded, dismounting with a thud that echoed her doubts. "Seen it before. Buddy of mine lost to a rigged inspection at the mill. But we don't ride blind. Jacob's word is iron. Yours is the spark." His words landed like a steadying hand, evoking the convoy's dawn roar, the sea of chrome that had transformed her isolation into alliance. They stood in companionable silence, the night's hush broken only by the occasional crackle from Ryan's radio, confirmations of warrants, whispers of bored panic. Dawn broke with a vengeance, the sun slicing through the clubhouse windows like a blade, illuminating dust motes dancing in golden shafts. The group mobilized swiftly, Grace clutching her briefcase like a shield, Ryan in his reinstated uniform, Jacob shrugging into his vest despite the pull of bandages, the Iron Promise patch a defiant emblem. Emily rode shotgun in the lead van again, the engine's hum a familiar lullaby now, tires humming over dew-slick roads as the convoy reformed, sleeker this time, a dozen riders flanking like guardians, their presence a quiet thunder. The hospital emerged from the mist, its facade less imposing in the harsh morning light, windows reflecting the sky's reluctant blue, as staff milled uneasily in the lot. State investigators waited at the entrance, crisp suits a stark contrast to the club's weathered leather, clipboards poised like drawn weapons. Led by a no-nonsense woman named Amelia, her badge gleaming, they nodded to Ryan, old contacts from joint ops, and swept inside without fanfare, the doors swinging like reluctant confessions. Emily watched from the van's edge, heart hammering as the convoy held perimeter. Engines low to avoid alarm, but firm enough to remind. Whispers rippled from the building. Ellis cornered in his office, fumbling excuses as auditors pored over ledgers. Sarah's folder now amplified by digital trails Grace had unearthed. Emails linking board votes to Vanguard kickbacks, delays in care tied to budget slashes for luxury blueprints. Hours stretched, the sun climbing to bake the lot in relentless heat, the air shimmering with tension and the faint, oily tang of idling bikes. Riders dismounted in shifts, sharing water from thermoses, stories exchanged in low tones. A mechanic, recounting a clinic shutdown that cost his sister her leg. A veteran nurse, mirroring Emily's shifts with tales of rationed supplies. Jacob joined her on the grass verge, his limp, less pronounced eyes scanning the horizon. "Remember that night in the ER?" he said, voice a rumble beneath the distant clamor. "Your hands steady when mine weren't. This is payback, not fists, but the truth you pulled from the shadows." She met his gaze, the storm-grey depths holding echoes of roads untaken, promises etched in mileage. "Feels like honoring him," she replied, touching the photo's outline. "Like the family's promise now." By midday, the investigators emerged, Amelia's face set in grim lines, escorting a subdued Ellis and 2 board members, their briefcases empty, faces ashen under the glare. Flanked by local PD, Ryan coordinating seamlessly, the group loaded into unmarked cars, the hospital sealed for deeper probes. No dramatic arrests, just the quiet click of cuffs and the shuffle of feet, but the weight of it settled like justice's long shadow. Bystanders gathered, phones capturing the exodus, murmurs turning to nods of approval. The nurse who'd stood tall, the club that rode for the right. Grace approached Emily, a preliminary report in hand. Irregularities confirmed, embezzlement flagged, patient endangerment logs exposed. "It's unraveling," she said, a rare smile cracking her focus. "Reinstatements on the table for you and Sarah. Full review." The convoy ignited in celebration, a controlled roar that shook the lot without menace, riders forming a respectful arc as Amelia shook hands with Jacob. "Your presence helped," she admitted, the admission a bridge across divides. Emily felt the surge, a moral tide turning, her brother's ghost quieted by the chorus of voices amplified. As they rode back, the wind whipping through open windows, carrying the scent of sun-warmed pine and freedom, she realized the depth. Redemption wasn't solitary absolution, but a shared horizon, bonds forged in crisis enduring like chrome under storm. Back at the clubhouse, the hall filled with allies, Sarah arriving with tear-streaked relief, hugs exchanged amid clinking mugs and laughter rough as gravel. Jacob raised a toast under the rafters, the lights slanting golden. "To Emily Harlan, savior, sister, rider, iron promise keeps its word." Cheers echoed, the air alive with the hum of engines cooling outside, stars re-emerging as dusk painted the sky in purples and golds. Emily stood among them, the photo now pinned to the wall beside club memorabilia, a gallery of chosen scars. The corruption's roots ran deep, trials looming like distant thunder, but the fight was claimed, honor reclaimed in the quiet victories that outlasted noise. In the weeks that followed, Eldridge Hollow shifted subtly. The hospital's east wing spared for care, not condos, whispers of reform in boardrooms. Emily reinstated, her shifts now laced with purpose, Sarah at her side. Vanguard's grip loosened, state suits piling like fallen leaves. But the true legacy rode on, promises whispered in ER lamplight, fulfilled in chrome convoys under endless skies. Emily took to the road occasionally, wind in her hair, Jacob's spare helmet a perfect fit, The Brotherhood's engine a heartbeat against the world's cynicism. Her brother's promise lived, evolved in loyalty's unbreaking chain, a redemption etched in miles and moral fire. Thank you for riding this journey with us to the end. These tales of honor and heart are brighter with you, along for the miles. If Emily's stand moved you, hit that subscribe button and join the convoy. Your support keeps these stories revving toward those who need them most. Until the next horizon.